Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you again this week. I got a tough question for you. It just kind of rattled me a little bit, and it still is making me feel a little bit uncomfortable. So I had to bring in an expert to get this question answered for me. And it's going to be like normal questions that we have on the surface. It seems like, oh my gosh, that's so easy. And then as it sinks in, it gets a little bit more complicated and a little bit more uncomfortable. So strap in. I am super excited today. I'm going to start with the question. And the question is, what is your company's purpose?
Wow, that one's for me, or that's for the audience?
That's for the audience, my
Yeah,
friends. So,
thank
so we'll,
goodness. Thank you.
yeah, exactly right. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Dr. Brad Harris. He's the co-founder of People Leader Accelerator, and he works at HEC Paris as a professor. So welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, hey, don't be acting like you don't know what you're talking about because you're a PhD. You got this down. So we're here to learn from you. So I'm just going to start off with kind of thinking about purpose because we tend to go through life, I think, with that's kind of like a backseat question. Not a lot of people are leading with that in a day-to-day basis. Is that kind of what your research found in that situation, Brad?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I think we're on the same page here. And listen, a quick caveat: like one of the paradoxes of being a so-called expert or having a PhD is like you realize all the things that you don't know. So, but purpose is definitely one of those places. Yeah, purpose is super important. We actually have a center in our society and organizations group that's studying purposeful leadership here on campus at AGC. And I know of several other leadership scholars that are in this space. And it's something that's sort of fascinated me for a long time and something that I'm interested in. And I'm really, really excited to kind of unpack this topic with you.
Well, that's awesome. I just have a personal question. So you end up at Texas A&M. How did you end up in Paris? I mean, what got you to Paris?
Well, it's a journey, Dave. It's a journey. So Texas A&M is where I got my PhD. I'm a Texas guy. If I get really nervous or if I have a couple of beers, you can hear it come out of me.
I can already hear it, so it's
Oh,
awesome.
okay. So I guess, well, I didn't drink beer, so it's definitely the nerves
Uh-oh.
or the excitement, I
The
guess.
excitement, yep, for sure.
So Texas A&M took my first job out of the PhD program at the University of Illinois. Loved it. Moved back for family reasons. I was at Texas Christian University. Spent 7 years there. And then I think the pandemic just sort of like caused a lot of, or gave us a lot of time for reflection and introspection. And my wife and I, we have three kids that are all kind of young, and we thought we need to quit watching House Hunters and just talking about doing something crazy. We need to actually do this. And so
Wow.
we had an awesome opportunity, and we're learning new things every single day.
Wow, that's so cool. Well, thank you again for jumping on today
Yeah.
with me to unpack this purpose piece. I want to get a yes or no question, right? An easy one for you that I've noticed that in the research that I did on, talking about purpose, and obviously my book is called Growing on Purpose because I run into so many companies that grow by mistakes, so there's like this couple of different things here. But my question really is, first of all, does purpose equal growth? And does it mean no purpose equals no growth in a company? Is that a formula that you would feel is accurate?
Wow, that's a great question. I'm an it depends kind of guy, but
Yeah.
for the sake of entertaining your question and following the rules you gave me, I'm going to say no. I don't think growth necessarily comes with purpose, and
Okay.
the flip side of that coin. I think there's a challenge. This is one that I'm working on in my teaching, in my work with
Sure.
People Leader Accelerator, and on myself. Of like, once we learn our purpose, once we figure this thing out, how do we scale it? And I think I can imagine scenarios, for instance, where we have a deep purpose, but that purpose is really like most effectively accomplished or lived out on a relatively small scale. Like maybe it involves working with two or three people really, really closely. I don't know.
Okay.
What do you think, Dave?
Well, it looked like it's, again, from my perspective, growing on purpose versus growing by mistake. If you ask a company leader, owner, whatever, tell me about your growth and your journey, and they look back and they kind of have a deer in the headlights look because they couldn't really replicate that if they had to. Because, and again, it's not right or wrong, good or bad. It's just, it happened to be their journey where they weren't able to, there wasn't intentionality with it. And so, I want someone listening that is interested in growth to kind of get a feel for, the importance of that purpose. And I mean, statistically, I love finding statistics. Forbes said that companies with purpose have a 52% chance of success in a major transformation versus only 16% success without purpose. So I just want to kind of set the stage today, for us, Brad, that purpose is kind of like the basis for success. And that's where I'm coming from. But again, you have a much more of the research than I ever had. So that's why I wanted to kind of get your feel for that, because I want people today to be able to get a sense of what their purpose is. And it might be a simple little, my purpose is to make my team's families better place. It might be my customers a better experience. I don't know, there's no right or wrong purposes, but I just, whether it's a deep one or a simple one, I'm hoping by the end of this that some people listening will be able to identify one purpose that they have or their company has. So how do you start with an entrepreneur that comes to you, excuse me, and is interested in purpose, but hasn't really tackled that, question before?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for giving me your perspective on this. I sort of equated your question, does purpose mean headcount growth or profit growth or something like this?
Sure.
Listening to you talk, it occurs to me that I do wholeheartedly agree that having a purpose really sets a healthy foundation for individual and organizational growth. Okay, so what I think like a good place for us to start is like, what is purpose? Like, why do
Mhm.
we talk about this? What does it actually mean?
Sure.
And I think if we boil it down really, really simply, we could just say it's our reason for existing.
Okay.
And so for that to happen, like when an entrepreneur comes to me or a student or anybody that's sort of thinking, I want more out of this life, I want some direction, I want some energy behind what I'm doing, like it always starts to me with self-awareness. Like, let's figure out who you are first and how you got to be that way. And so there's all kinds of tools and frameworks we can use that will help us understand like our behavioral tendencies, our underlying motivations, and things like this. um, how our past experiences connect together. Like, I talk a lot about authenticity in my classes, not
Okay.
authentic leadership or anything like this, but a big part of that exercise is kind of setting this framework for, we always have three selves inside of us that are going on: our past self, our future self, and of course the current self. And if we think of this like a Venn diagram, so three circles that overlap to some extent, the thing that connects all three of those circles right there in the middle of that Venn diagram is sort of what I refer to as our values.
Okay.
These things that may manifest differently in behaviors and situations, but these underlying things that, our past informs our present and our future, of course, but we're not bound by these past things. It's our values that hold all of these three identities going together. Okay, so awareness is the first step.
Sure.
And I do some coaching. I think you do some coaching. A lot of people do coaching. A very common phrase in that space and a very helpful phrase is, with awareness comes choice. So first, like, let's build up some awareness. Let's figure out where we're starting, and let's decide what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. The next step in this idea of how do we find purpose for our organization or for ourselves is we have to stop looking inward. Like, that part is vitally important to this equation. But now we need to look outward and figure out where we matter. So from pro self to pro social. And so where do we make a difference right now? Maybe this is not our purpose, but it's a really good start for figuring out where we like to make impact and how we like to make impact. And then you go through this exercise of, okay, I've done this work to figure out who I am as a person. I've identified some of my values. I figured out right now, this is how I matter. This is where I matter. let's blow this thing up and let's figure out, is there a way that I could scale up my impact that's consistent with my values? And I think like this is really, really enlightening. I don't know what your growth story is, Dave. I did read about it. It's a really cool one. But mine is like, I wanted to be a teacher. Then I wanted to be a basketball coach because I loved basketball. Then I took my faith seriously. So I wanted to be a youth minister. I went through all of these phases. And each time one of those didn't work out, or that's not what I did, I sort of felt this moment of failure. And I think it's because I didn't really do this explicit heavy lift of what are your values.
Sure.
Now I'm in a job where I'm working with entrepreneurs, I'm working with business leaders, I'm working with students, and I'm helping them grow. And when I look back, and like there's some like hindsight's 2020, right? But I can see like really what my value was, what my purpose was, at least how I think of it right now, is to help people grow, to help people get unstuck and be better versions of themselves. And this job is just as good, if not better, than some of those other roles I was pursuing.
Sure.
So it's sort of a fluid, iterative process when we think about purpose.
So if we circle back to your self-awareness piece for a second, Brad, I mean, we use EQ assessments a lot to be able to understand what your emotional intelligence is, which really, talks about self-awareness. Is it a broader topic where it's really company awareness as well? I mean, I feel like there would be, like team awareness, company awareness, individual awareness, almost customer awareness. Are all of those kind of, in your mind, are those all playing a fact in that self-awareness piece?
Yeah, and good call out. I've been talking about this sort of from an individual perspective, but and when we talk about this in our nerdy research terms, we say like the individual level, the team level. We have different levels of analysis. It can go to the org level, society level, cultural level, all these things. And yeah, all of these things are connected, and it gets trickier, but not impossible, but still very, very, very important when we move up to levels of analysis to like teams or overall organizations. I work with a lot of startups that are trying to scale up. In that case, like it's pretty easy to draw through lines. Like your founder believed this, your founder thought this, and when the team's small enough, that kind of pervades through the organization, partly because they're selecting people that agree with them. But when we get really big, like over 50, and then into the thousands, like you have to be really, really intentional about communicating this purpose, acknowledging no one's going to have that purpose completely aligned with you, and then creating systems that sort of keep that purpose top of mind.
Sure. Well, and you bring up a really good point on that, Brad. I mean, if I'm hiring somebody, how aligned do I need to be in your mind with the purpose? Like if the company purpose is X, and I'm looking at somebody's who doesn't align with that yet, or they haven't discovered it, or quite frankly, maybe they don't agree with it. That's got to be hard if you're trying to scale and you find a good qualified person. Technically, let's say they have the job skills, but maybe they lack that purpose alignment. Is that like how do you work that into your world?
So that's a thing, Dave. That is a thing. Where should we start on this one? This one's messy. So leadership, I think, are one of the most fascinating things about leadership that I enjoy studying and talking about and helping leaders work through is these tensions. And one of the tensions we're talking about here is like, how do we get purpose alignment? How do we get alignment on like not only what the job is, but what this company is about, what it stands to do, but also bringing in people that are different enough that they have a fresh perspective on these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to be too nuanced here, but I do think there's like some pretty clear black and white ways that we can think about this. Maybe not black and white, but we can see different shades of gray here.
Okay.
When you're a bigger organization and you're more mature and you're not really kind of on the growth edge and you don't really have to adapt as rapidly as somebody that's truly, we might go out of business if we don't get this right.
Sure.
I think you can carve out job roles, job descriptions, and incentive programs that make the shared purpose a little bit less important. For instance, even if someone doesn't fully align with it, they can still get the job done. They can still contribute to the organization because we have semi-rigid processes in place that prevent the deviations. When we're in a highly complex environment, such as a startup that's trying to now be a scale up, where we don't know exactly what success looks like and things are changing all the time, we need people that can really have the motivation to survive through that, but they can also sort of feel empowered and be adaptable in ways that honor that purpose and that mission. I shouldn't
Sure.
say mission, let's stick on purpose.
Yeah.
And so if you're in a dynamic environment, you really, really want people to share that purpose, because that gives them to say, I can see that the situation's changed. I'm not going to follow my job description here. I'm going to do what's right in the spirit of this bigger purpose.
Sure. Yeah, that's got to be tough. I mean, again, if you're a small company and you can hand select people, but like you said, if you're in that scale up mode where you need to add, a dozen people in the next 30 days or whatever the numbers are, it's got to take on a whole different meaning. So I was just curious because, when we use DISC a lot. And so, and you're able to kind of look at a job. And I always say, if the job could talk, what would it say that it needed? And it may not be, hey, you're good at spreadsheets, or it's not the technical piece, but, it needs to be something deeper. And that's where it's really hard, sometimes to identify that. And then when you get to purpose, it can even be more complicated, especially if an entrepreneur doesn't have a purpose. So that's probably almost like, I almost feel like that's one of the reasons not to have it. So you don't have to worry about that alignment. I mean, it's obviously the chicken's way out, but it seems like it's a kind of a easy way out, I guess. So, but sooner or later, that's going to come back to either we're starting to separate, the team, or a person on the team or a group of people are going in the opposite direction as an entrepreneur. Are you involved in those kinds of situations to kind of bring that team back into alignment then?
Yeah, I am. And I've done a lot of work with executive committees and things like this where we're kind of seeing, oh gosh, we got away with not having a purpose. Maybe we grew by accident, we had some success, or maybe we just didn't take the time to clarify what the purpose was. And then there's a classic article, Dave, by a guy named Larry Greiner. It was originally published by Harvard Business Review in the late 70s. It's been republished several times. His name's Larry Greiner, and the article is called Evolution and Revolution as Organizations Grow. And any entrepreneur that's sort of moving out of that, you're in your parents' garage phase and you're now trying to grow a company, should look at this because it speaks to what you're saying.
Yeah.
We go through these moments of intense revolution where we know things are going to be different. They have to be different if we're going to succeed. And then we go through these milder, still exciting, probably still moderate amounts of chaos since humans are involved. But we go through these periods of evolution where we kind of grow, we refine our processes. This is where we can get complacent and we can start to think, we can start to take that easy way out that you're talking about. You know what? The purpose doesn't matter all that much.
Sure.
But inevitably, we will hit a threshold, whether it's from the external environment or something internal. Maybe we cross a headcount growth thing where we really need that purpose so that as we go through this next revolution, we can all be on the same page. People that aren't on the same page can either choose to opt in or opt out, but we know where we're trying to go. So I think I actually agree with your assessment. Purpose may not be, go ahead.
Yeah, no, finish.
I was just going to say, purpose may not feel like it's all that important all the time, but you don't know when it's going to be important. So you better have it, and you better know how to tell that story.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I'm a black and white thinker in my mind, and I'm trying really hard to find gray. And I just, I was raised that way, and my brain's that way. So I think about like a church, like you talked about before. You know what? There's an alignment that if you're going to work for this particular church, you have to be, it's counterproductive if you're not, going to be in alignment. So that's what I think of in my mind. I think like I take my church activity, And then I'm like, well, I got to be aligned there. So I think everybody should be aligned at work. And it's like, how do you not aligned with this, with this purpose at work? And then you start to realize that there's a lot of different people and a lot of different, personalities. And so you talked the second thing about starting to look outward. Once you've gone through your self-awareness exercises and now you're going to look outward. Am I trying to find a nonprofit? Am I trying to find, what am I trying to find when I'm looking outward? I have such a limited vision there. So I'm hoping you can, help me open my eyes on that one.
Yeah. Wow. So we all want a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives. We'll stick with meaning for a second. A lot of us, when we hear this meaning, we immediately go to things like nonprofit, our faith-based organizations, things like that. We want to be feeding the poor. We want to be providing water to these places that don't have regular drinking water. This feels important to us. This is a meaningful life.
Right.
And yet, when we look at our organizations, let me just be candid with you. Like I said, like the experts paradox, like you realize all you don't know. I'm really conflicted about how to talk about this because I think some organizations hire people like me to come give them a purpose and they want something deep. Like we're doing these great things for society, but really the company is like, we're picking up all of the trash after a football game at the stadium or something like this.
Sure.
And it's
Sure. Yeah.
and it feels like a stretch when they give you the stuff they put on their walls. Like we are making the world a more sanitary and enjoyable place. Like maybe that's true, but like I'm not sure your people go home and think like I can't wait to go to work tomorrow so I can make the world clean. So I think when you look outward though, like this is where I was thinking more on the individual level, but like where do I matter? Like we can start to like infer some things that may not be the most glamorous, but like we do this, like we sell soda or we clean stadiums or something like this. But your purpose might be we really invest in the people that work for us so they can find their next opportunity or something like this. It may not be exactly what you think it is. It may be you're providing people that didn't have a lot of great job opportunities with an opportunity to learn, to make a living, to take care of their families.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool.
Yeah. And that's the hard part right there is like, where do you land in this situation? I know for myself, I started this podcast in May of 2020, and it started purely thinking that as we were shutting down in the United States here, we were shutting down, and I'm a, super outgoing, want to be with people type of person. I'm feeling these walls closing in on me. And I'm like, well, you know what? I used to just get together with people and, have lunch, coffee, whatever, try to do one a week or one every other week. And now we can't do that. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to keep doing that on this new Zoom thing that nobody had any clue what it was, So I'm like, I'm going to try and find people. And then I'm like, wow, well, as long as I'm talking to them, if something really good comes out of it, I should probably record that. And then it graduated from there to, well, as long as I'm recording it, I might as well, maybe somebody's going to enjoy it. So I put it out, for the world to see. So I look at my purpose. It started really small, just selfishly, just meeting a need for myself. But then it kind of grew and grew and grew. And now we're 160 episodes or so in. We've talked to people all over the world. We've heard from people all over the world that they love hearing, what's going on. So that's what I think is so personal about that. So do you kind of help people make their purpose rather than, just try and find some generic purpose that might suit their company?
Yeah, I do. I do some coaching, which is very much an individual, sometimes a team thing, but it's very much an individual journey, the way I've worked with this. And that's a really big thing is like, how do we find what makes Dave tick? And where's Dave going to make a difference in this world? I think your description is more common than not. Like people go through and they think, I want to do this. Sometimes they don't even know why they want to do it. You called out like, I'm sort of an extrovert. Like I want to be with people. And then the COVID pandemic, the shutdown, like had these walls closing in on me. So I did this. And like that's part of it. Like sometimes we don't know why we like something, but it's like let's lean into it for just a second And then you learn something new, like, oh, maybe I can use this. Maybe I can record something because this is useful. Wait a
Right.
minute. Maybe I can even connect this to a broader audience. Now you end up hosting a podcast and you're doing all these successful things, Dave. And it didn't start that way. Your purpose
Right.
was not to have a podcast.
Right.
It was to
Exactly. Yep.
it was to connect with people, to help people, these sorts of things.
Well, and that's what's so powerful is it starts at simple. And that's what I think is so cool about what we're talking about today. Like you just said, though, there is, in between the comfort zone and the growth zone is that fear zone. And so for people listening, that's where I think we tend to really struggle is you're in your comfort zone most likely right now. And let's be real, what Brad's talking about is kind of being outside your comfort zone because number one, you're going to find something that's purposeful in your life. Number two, then you're going to be really vulnerable and share it with people. And I think that's really hard because some people are like, well, that's really dumb. You come up with this great purpose. And like you said, picking up trash after a football game, somebody's like feeling really, really good about that right after they've done it. And then other people are like, wanting to rain on that parade. And they're like, well, that's really dumb. So, you got to kind of push through that and work through that fear zone to get into, that learning zone. And I just think that's a cool analogy.
Yeah. Hey, can I piggyback off that for 1 second?
For sure. Absolutely.
So you're exactly right. We are talking, or this conversation is most useful when it's digested by someone that's sort of in that space of, I want to be a little bit different than I am right now. And I'm not sure how to do it. Right. And I'm not sure if I can do it in a way that's true to myself or true to my purpose.
Right.
There's an awesome article that I use in my class. It's like 2 decades old now by authors are named Keegan and Leahy, but it's like forget the name of the article, but you can look it up. It's Harvard Business Review. And they talk about this idea of competing commitments. And it's this idea that even within ourselves, we do things that are counterproductive. One, as a safety mechanism, and probably related to that, because we have convinced ourselves our values are the actual behaviors that we're doing, and then we're not flexible on the behaviors. Let me give you a personal example real fast. I taught at Texas A&M, and then I went to the University of Illinois, and for the first time in my life, I taught a class that was predominantly international students, and it was challenging. Like there were different cultural norms that they expected. I try to use humor in my class. I convinced myself that I do this to connect with students and make it more relatable.
Sure.
I got honest with myself when it stopped working at the University of Illinois, and I was like, I also use that not just to connect, but it like anytime I feel scared or insecure, like I go to this like humor thing to deflect.
Yeah.
And so I had to like ask myself, is humor like a true value, or was humor just one way that I kind of tried to live out the value of connecting with my students? And It was the latter. And so I realized like, hey, Brad, at least in these contexts, you got to rein it in. You can't try to be the funny guy anymore. You've got to really approach this in a different way. And that it sounds silly, Dave, but that felt like such a monumental, scary thing to me to abandon this tool.
Yeah. And you were outside your comfort zone on that one, I'm guessing, hey?
Yeah. But anyway, I changed my behavior, but I never changed my values. And I think that's what we're trying to unlock with this self-awareness and then looking outward thing is, what is non-negotiable and then what is negotiable?
Yeah. And that's different for each person. I mean, it's, it's kind of like, I think Paul said some people can eat food, food sacrificed to idols. Some people can eat meat. I mean, so some people only can eat vegetables. So the goal is to try and accept those people that way rather than enforce your convictions on other people. That never seems to end well. When I tell you how to live your life, so, but that's pretty cool. McKinsey said that only about 62% of companies have a purpose statement. So, which means that it's highly likely that people listening today, Brad, don't have a purpose statement for their company. Is that something that you guys help with? Is that something that I would need to kind of bring if I wanted to, work with People Leadership Accelerator? Is that stuff that is kind of like prerequisites, or how does that work if I've never really considered a purpose statement before?
No, it's not a prerequisite. We cover that. We have and my co-author and I and fellow teacher and People Leader Accelerator, Andrew Bartlow, and I wrote a book. You can't see it. It's way back there, but it's called Scaling for Success. And we actually have a chapter that's dedicated to outlining things like a purpose statement, along with values and things like this. Like, how do you actually go about doing this? How do you do it in a way that's real and not just like a clever phrase that you put on your foyer
Right.
wall? So no, that is not something you have to start.
Okay.
I probably wouldn't believe you, even if you told me you had a purpose statement. I would think like you came up with a cool phrase. Let's. So yeah, we're constantly working through that, and I do think purpose is probably slightly more useful than a mission statement and a vision statement, but they're all related. They're all kind of out of the same ilk.
Yeah.
The trick is, do you actually live these things out, and do you create systems that actually keep that purpose alive?
Yeah, yeah. And I think the research that I did for my book talking about the teams is that the vast majority of people don't believe that their company mission is actually the way they do business, which can be really more damaging, right? So if you're going to go through to get a purpose statement, I mean, number one, it really holds you as the leader accountable. It's something that you have to make sure that you're always in alignment with as much as possible, because it sure seems like you would send a twisted message to your group. That's on the wall, don't worry, or that's on page 4 of the employee handbook, don't worry about that. That was just some guy's idea. I mean, I'm assuming it's better to not have a purpose statement than to have one and not follow it. Where do you fall on that?
I need to think through that. I think we might be on the same page here. Like, it's almost like saying I'd rather have questionable or unknown credibility than no credibility.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'll call out also, like, sometimes I'm being a little hard on these companies that put a purpose up that feels hollow to the employees. There
Sure.
may be people, there may have been truth in that process. Like, this is what we want our purpose to be.
Right.
But I think there's also this delicate balance of being aspirational and being real. Like, what is the purpose and what do we want the purpose to be? And if that gap is too big, I think it's really easy for employees to lose sight of what's important and even get disillusioned and cynical and disengaged and all of that.
Yeah. I mean, I can see if your purpose statement is true north and you deviate a couple of degrees, that's one thing, but to just abandon it altogether, I love the book People Over Profit.
Yeah.
If all of a sudden you say, hey, people over profit, but then you don't act that way and you kind of invert that where it's profit over people. I mean, true north becomes true south. That to me is way different than deviation a couple of degrees one way or another. So I'm just curious as we start to land this today, if there's people listening right now, Brad, that are kind of like, wow, I've never really thought about this. Where do they go? Is there some resources for them? What would be their next step for them if they wanted to learn more about this?
Okay. So if they want to learn more about purpose and values, there's quite a few places that you could look. One book that I really like that kind of at least tangentially talks about this is a book called Edge by Laura Wong. And she's a friend. She's an outstanding scholar. But this book is really about thinking about your prior experiences, even the adversity you've gone through, and letting that inform who you are and what you're going to be. And she is just really real and really candid. So that's one of my favorites for this topic.
So the book is called Edge.
Edge.
And
One other one I'll throw. Laura Wong.
Laura Wong. Okay. And
Yeah.
Go ahead with the other one.
Why Should Anyone Be Led by You by Bill George. And so this book has this book has come under fire, and like they kind of from a scholarly perspective, I think they may have oversold the authenticity angle. Even still, this book is enough to stand on its own. It does a really good job of forcing you to think about values and gives you some outlines for how you can use those to inform a broader purpose that motivates others.
Wow, that's so cool. So, what would your tip of the week be for anyone listening? If there was like one takeaway, whether something we talked about or something that we haven't talked about, if you wanted one nugget for somebody that's listening to kind of sit with for a little bit, what would that be for you?
Yeah, I had one written down. I'm going to give you two. This is the one I wrote down, like anticipation. It was going to be really profound. You don't always have to be nice, but you can always be kind. Like kindness is a big deal to me. So you don't have to be
Sure.
nice, but you can always be kind. Let me give you one that fits more with our topic too. Um, well, maybe that's enough to land it. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that go into this,
Sure.
and if you want to live out your values and live out your purpose, remember the three C's. Clarity. We should always be pushing clarity. We should always be consistent in how we talk about this, and there should be consequences. So clarity, consistency, and consequences are sort of the three ingredients you need to drive a purpose-filled culture, a
Wow.
purpose-driven culture.
So clarity, consistency, and consequences. And I
Yeah.
think that, yeah, those are really great. And I think what I hear immediately upon those listening to those, Brad, is that all three of them are going to need somebody to have. I'm going to need somebody to come alongside me to do that, because if I sit down with a blank sheet of paper and go, okay, let's get clear. Let's write down what is clarity. I'm already like struggling to kind of start the process. And then you get into the consistency. Now I have to kind of teach this to my team. And then consequences, like now who's going to hold me accountable? And that's, I think, why coaching like what you do is so awesome, because we struggle with, our golf swing. And so we have a golf coach, or we have somebody that watches it or videotapes it, and boy, just in that little bit of time, coaches may add such value there. So I really appreciate that. If somebody wants to connect with you, Brad, if what we talked about today, somebody wants to learn more, about HEC Paris, or the People Leader Accelerator, what's the best way for people to connect with you?
Yeah, so my name is Brad Harris. For those that tuned in or maybe missed it at first, you can find me on the HEC Paris website. I also use LinkedIn. So if you find Brad Harris, PhD on LinkedIn, you can find me. And also, Dave, like you're a really generous guy. Like I really appreciate what you do to enrich the community that you're trying to serve. And
Sure.
you pushed one thing you pushed me to do before our call was figure out a way that I can give back more than just this conversation. And
Sure.
so we have some resources on the People Leader Accelerator website. It's peopleleaderaccelerator.com.
Perfect.
They're called guides, and there's several topics. Let's see, we have topics on onboarding, people analytics, compensation, culture, and strategic people planning. You can get one of those for free by entering the code podcast on there. So
Awesome.
I would love for your people, if they think it's useful, to get one of those for free and go on and do some awesome things.
Yeah, I looked at those. There's that one onboarding piece really intrigued me, because again, most people think onboarding is about a 3-minute process and then it's off to, go do your job. So, one of the obvious important pieces of onboarding would be talking about the purpose of and the direction of the company. And so thank you so much for that gift. That's awesome. So go to peopleleaderaccelerator.com and use the keyword podcast to be able to access some really great information. So this time flew by, Brad. Thank you. I have so many more questions. I'm probably going to have to get you back to unpack more of this, but I just thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. Thank you for the research and for, again, keeping everybody accountable. Hopefully you're helping them with their clarity. That kind of is really a great place to start, and then getting that consistency with the team to be able to have the same message, if everyone's singing from the same hymnal, that song sure sounds way better in my mind. So, thank you again so much for all you're doing, and can't wait to keep learning more.
Thanks for having me, Dave.